Yeah.
Great, there it is. Well, hi everybody. Really glad to be here. Cayenne, thank you for the invite. Glad to be here again with you guys. I'm Mark McLaughlin, co-founder of Old Line Spirits in Baltimore, Maryland. So what we're here to do today is to take you guys through some of the samples that Cayenne got to you, which is a pretty nice array of what we're putting on the market right now as far as whiskeys. So as we kick things off, I think we have 6 samples to do today. As we kick things off, I'll spend just a little bit of time for the first few minutes here to give you an idea of kind of where we came from and what we're doing, and then and we'll lead into the first sample here pretty soon, so you're not waiting too long. But like I said, I'm one of the co-founders of Old Line, and what Old Line focuses on is American Single Malt whiskey, a category that I'm sure you're all aware of. And it's a very interesting space in the market. It's a category that doesn't even officially exist yet. We as producers are kind of acting as if it exists, and we're working with the government to get it firmly established and codified into the TTB regs. But right now, we're essentially very loosely defined as an American malt whiskey, which is basically the same definition as bourbon, except take the word corn out and put the words malted barley in, and that's your malt whiskey. So we, as a group of producers, have lobbied successfully, we think, and are on the 1 yard line to make this category official. And what we're trying to do, and I think I speak for probably most of us in the industry, is we're trying to open up the American, whiskey culture to something a little bit new and different, which is a single malt made here in America, but also not beholden to the exact same rules and regulations as a single malt made in Scotland or Japan or wherever, Ireland. We want to do it in our way, and the way within that we've defined the category in a way that I think is very, very nicely. It's defined enough to keep the category integrity from the very beginning as we grow, but also wide enough to allow for a lot of different flavor profiles. So as an example, to compare it to a bourbon, bourbon, as you guys know, has to be aged in a virgin oak cask. American Single Malt can be aged in virgin oak or used oak. That's our choice, whatever the producer wants to do. In Scotland, you have to produce your single malt whiskey on a pot still, and it has to be at least 3 years old. And in America, it could be a day old, as long as you put it into a barrel. And it can be a pot still or a column still. So what it really does is it allows for not only a wide range of flavors, but that whole no minimum age allows for newcomers to enter the market, throw it in a small barrel, put it out, make some revenue, and get their company going. And as they grow towards, more of a traditional model of using the 53 gallon plus barrels. So there's a lot of, we want more entrants in this market. So we're trying to keep it where it's not exclusive, it's protected, but also inclusive and welcoming to new members. So that's what we're doing. And I think I speak probably for most of the producers, and we think pretty similarly on this. What Old Line is doing within that kind of landscape that I just mentioned, what Old Line is doing is we're taking what we think are our favorite elements of old world single malt Scotch and our favorite elements of bourbon. So we're doing, for the intent of this conversation, we're doing all non-peated malt. We do make a little bit as a side project, but really everything you're going to taste today, and we built the company around all non-peated malt. And most of our procedures, in which we can certainly get into later if people have questions as far as how we mash and distill, are very much New World style, and we age everything we have is aged in virgin oak, typically number 4 char. So we're really just taking what we think are the best elements, our favorite elements of those two worlds, and putting them into one process, and the end result is what we'll taste here in a minute. And right before we jump into that first sample, where Arch and I, my business partner and I, how we got into this is, we're Navy buddies. We used to fly together for 10 years on active duty, got out of the service. I became an investment banker. He became an engineer. Neither one of us were really loving our civilian careers. We both were living in Baltimore for different reasons. I didn't grow up here, nor did he. He's from Florida. I'm from Boston. But, our lives and wives and whatnot and all that sort of thing kind of brought us both to Baltimore. And we 10 years ago, it was 10 years ago last month that I just said sayonara to the bank. It wasn't for me. Wanted to have my own company, wanted to make something. I thought about beer. Beer's great, but beer was getting saturated. I love whiskey as well. And I'm like, you know what? This whole whiskey thing seems like it's going somewhere. Shit, why not? You know, I'll just quit my job and jump in and see if I can figure it out, which was, it worked out, but it was one of the dumbest things I've ever done, but it ended up working out okay. So I'll say I'm glad I did it. But I really had no freaking clue at all what I was doing. But I quit the job, and the idea was to make bourbon and rye. Bourbon, for all the reasons any one of us would want to make bourbon. It's an amazing spirit. It's the kind of the quintessential American style whiskey. There's so many amazing things about it. I love it. And then also rye, because, you know, Maryland is a rye producing state historically, and there's a whole heritage here that was just starting to get revived. So those two categories really drew me and Arch, who jumped on a few months later, really drew us into this conceptually. But where we took a very meaningful turn is that we actually ended up meeting two gentlemen who owned a small distillery out near Seattle, a place called Bow, Washington, Sandwich Island. It's really a spit of land more than an island. But these two gentlemen were Vietnam veterans, and they were looking to sell their tiny 60-gallon pot still distillery. And they were looking to sell their distillery at the same time that we were looking to get started. And we're Iraq, Afghanistan vets. We met them. Well, I met Bob, one of the two founders at a conference. Very much great guy. I mean, love the guy. And hit it off right away. And he was looking to transition out, and we were looking to get into it. And it just said, and they were making this new category of American Single Malt. We love the whiskey, and we said, you know what? ASM it is. And that's really how we got on this path. So with that, before I go on that, I'm going to jump into the first sample here, so we aren't sitting here just looking at it. So with that, we'll get a first taste of what it is that Old Line is doing here. So the first sample is
Mark. Mark, before we start, thank you for your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyan. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. I got way more out of it than I ever gave, so I'm grateful to have done it. So for the first sample today, I'll try to hold it up the camera in a way that it's visible here. This is the American Single Malt Whiskey Flagship 95 proof, which is going to be really this one and the next one, the Navy Strength, are really going to kind of give you an idea of, really tells you probably most of what you need to know about what we're trying to put in the bottle and what we're trying to accomplish here. So this is 100% malted barley, as you guys would expect with a single malt, double distilled. And this is this one you're tasting, actually all except one of the ones you'll taste today, we actually distill with our production partner in Columbus, Ohio, Middle West Spirits. And they are, we can get into that whenever anybody has any questions on it, but with the partnership we've had since we started, we make our mash out there. You know, it's our grain, our yeast, and we worked with them ever since day one and learned a ton. And that's really the backbone of our production. Everything gets aged here in Baltimore, Ryan, right now, but a lot of it gets distilled out there. And you know, our distiller and or Arch will go out there each time we run it, just kind of and make sure everything's going as we want, and it always is. They're pros. And then we have a small 300-gallon still here that we do for bottled and bond and for our peated. So you guys will taste some of that small 300-gallon pot still stuff here later. But for this one, this is distilled on a column still and then finished in a pot. So already we're, you know, aside from being 100% malted barley and not being made in Scotland, we've already at this point deviated in the process to a more American style production. For those of you who are whiskey nerds in the group, we also do a grain on fermentation and distillation, which is much more bourbon style, as opposed to a lautered. We used to lauter. It ended up, for a couple of reasons, being a complication when we started producing in larger volume in the Middle West, and we experimented by grinding into a finer grist rather. And doing grain on at the risk is you could have tannic compounds that come across, but we found zero problem with it, and the process was easier and our yields went higher. So this is all these things are going to be much more, again, bourbon style put onto a single malt whiskey. You'll probably hear me say that several times.
So Mark, for our listeners who don't know or aren't familiar, what are the advantages of double stilling?
So thank you. So double distilling. So each time, again, I'll speak to the level of somebody who maybe doesn't know distilling quite as well. I'm sure a lot of you guys do. Each time you distill the product, you're purifying it, which I know you guys are familiar with. So to take it to one extreme, if we wanted to make a vodka, we would keep distilling it essentially over and over again until it got to 95% alcohol and got it essentially as much as we can reasonably get out, except for ethanol. Add water to it to make it potable, and now you get your neutral spirits. Now your vodka, which came from a neutral spirit. Well, with anything like a rum or a whiskey or a brandy, we want to taste the substrate. We want to taste the character of the grain we started with. Otherwise, we'd be crazy to make our spirit with malted barley because it costs an arm and a leg, right? So, but we are using that grain because we want the flavor from that grain. So that is to say that distilling things, one time, some actually, we actually have distilled. We've done single distillation in the past. Armagnacs will do single distillation, I believe. Things like that. You get probably a richer, more oily, funky spirit. You distill it twice, you clean it up more, but you still retain a lot of the original grain flavor. You start distilling it 3 times and more, like one Irish, so 3 times, you get the spirit lighter and lighter. So really, it's finding that balance between cleaning up the product and not distilling it so much that you've lost the character. There's that fine line, and double distillation is really where pretty much every bourbon and every single malt that I know of will work with. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
No, totally. I just want to make sure folks that are listening who aren't whiskey nerds can kind of follow.
No,
finding that Goldilocks spot.
No, in short, the more you distill, the more you strip away the flavors in layman's language. So as you keep distilling past a certain point, you're pretty much stripping away all the flavors. So that's for the layman, yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, 100% agree. And we originally, when we learned to make the whiskey from Bob, little 60-gallon still, it might be taller than me, but not by a lot. I'm actually right now looking at their original still was 30 gallons. I'm actually looking at it. It's in our bar. But you could take off the still head and you lift it up. And Bob would do single distillation, but he would take 100 feet of copper mesh, shove it up there, and basically change it out every 3 months, and it would act as a reflux agent. So it was a great whiskey. It wasn't. We wanted it to be a little sharper, a little cleaner. I'm not saying it was bad at all. It was wonderful, but it just wasn't. That was what he wanted, and we wanted something a little different. So we moved into double distillation from day one once we took over the business. So with that, so it's 100% malted barley, and then this is double distilled and then aged in number 4 char barrels. These will be aged in 53-gallon American standard barrels, and this will be a blend of 4 to almost 8-year-olds, so 4 to say 7.5.
Yeah, Mark. Since we mentioned run, what is the yield per run? How much do you yield per run?
So, well, it depends. So here in Baltimore with the 300-gallon still, on average, so for every 300-gallon mash in we do, we'll yield about 30 gallons of distillate at 135 to 140 proof. So a 10% yield is kind of the quick and dirty way to say it. So we could fill, if we ran on a single shift kind of every day, we could start pumping out about a 30-gallon barrel or, 2 53-gallon barrels every 3 days or something. And then in Ohio, then we can do it. Well, it's actually their capacity increased. It used to be we could do, I want to say 600 or 800 proof gallons a day on a shift. They were doing 6,000 gallon fermentations. They've expanded their facility. God knows what they can do now. So the delta between what we can produce here in Ohio is stark. I mean, they're growing like a weed. So yeah, it's very small here, but we do, dozens of barrels a day out there.
And do you stick to a narrow cut, or your cut is more? Your cuts are very.
As far as our cuts.
Yeah.
So Jerry, our distiller, can tell you the details, but when we do it here, so we take out in Ohio, there's no tails cut because it's a continuous column still for the first distillation run, and then. But here we'll do, I forget exactly when Jerry makes the heads cut, but really I think if all of us were making the whiskey in our still with the same grain, we'd probably make that heads cut at the same time. Like, it's pretty clear when the bad stuff's gone. The tails cut, which I think is where a lot more palate decision, in my opinion, for a distiller goes into it. I think we distilled down to 110 proof. We used to go down to 100, deeper into what you start getting to tails territory. And that was where we got a lot of the really nice buttery, oily mouthfeel. But if you diluted it enough, you sometimes started to get some grainy, almost like a hint of like a wet paper bag, which, wasn't great. So we started making our cut at a higher proof, so not going as deep into the tails. It did, I'd say it probably pulled back a little bit on the mouthfeel. It's still got a great mouthfeel, but it's just a little bit less intense and oily. But I just think it's clean, and that cleanliness for us is very important. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's why your mouthfeel is so rich even at 95 proof. I can feel that. That's the reason I wanted to know how do you cut your shots.
Yeah, some guys might cut it higher, right? Maybe go down to only distill it down to 120 or something, and that's where for us we that one man's tails is another man's hearts. For those who may not be familiar, when you distill on a pot still like we're talking about, there's the temperature. What you're doing is boiling off different compounds, and they all this big vat of liquid you put in there. It's basically like a beer without hops, and it's got water and ethanol and other alcohols and this, that, and the other, and they all boil off at different temperatures. So as you collect those vapors back into liquid and collect them in a vessel, the earliest things, the most volatile things, the methanols, the acetones, those are going to boil off first. Those are bad news. We'll get rid of those. But when they fade away, we get into what's called the hearts of the run, which is going to be the stuff that we actually want to, it's got the flavors that we want to put in the barrel to then ultimately make our whiskey. And then at the end of the day, as the temperature in that vessel keeps coming up, we start to get towards the boiling point of water. And the thing called tails is going to be butanol and all these heavy alcohols that, and again, to restate my comment earlier, kind of like one man's trash, another man's treasure, one man's tails, another man's hearts. If we all made whiskey with the same grain, the same yeast, and the same basic fermentation process here at Old Line, and I think we'd all make our heads cut the same place, like I mentioned earlier, because it's pretty clear when that methanol acetone is there, and when it fades away, it's pretty clear that it's gone. But I might make my tails cut, and Kyan, you might make it somewhere completely different because what you want in your whiskey is completely different. So what I would call tails, you might call hearts, or vice versa. So that's really where a lot of the art comes in, I think, in my opinion, as in the distillation process, is that tails cut in one man's opinion. So with you guys, so you have the 95 proof now. So I'm going to pause and give you guys a chance in case anybody does, no pressure. But if you want to ask questions or comment on this one before we pour the second one and go on with the discussion.
Yeah. What I'm getting off it on that front end, I'm getting the really sweet, the syrups, the honeys, along the lines of that. But on the back end, I know it's rated on low on your scale, but the florals seem to come out a lot for me at the very, very back end. But I actually really like it. It does have, like Ian said, was that mouthful. You can feel it throughout the whole thing, and I really enjoyed it. I like the sweetness. I'm a sweet guy, so.
Well done, thank you. Yeah, for me, the florals aren't that there, but obviously my palate and yours are different. And with that, and I think I guess you're referring to the back label, right? With the kind of the flavor wheel.
Yeah, your flavor wheel that you have. Yeah.
So for that, for those who aren't drinking it right now, or have the bottle in their hand, we put the flavor wheel in the back there as a kind of a generalization because like we said, what I taste and you taste won't be the same. But one thing we wanted to communicate with that was that so many people just don't know what an American single malt is all about. And a lot of people in America think single malt equals Islay, peaty, Scotch. And I love Islas, but a lot of people in America don't. So what we wanted to communicate there, really the almost the most important thing that we want to communicate is that kind of smoke is zero. And maybe there is a hint of smoke from the barrel, but as far as like peatiness, that's what we really want to communicate there. But yeah, so for me, floral's a little low, but that's just that's just my palate. So so for this, well, let's move on to number 2. Will be our Navy strength. So why don't we pour that sample and we kind of keep on trucking. So as we pour this, I'll I'll do a couple things. One, for those who may not be familiar, I'll explain kind of where Navy Strength came from, or at least the story that we've bought into. And then I'll explain why Old Line does it for whiskey, because it's not really a very commonly done thing in whiskey. So Navy Strength, as I understand it, back a long time ago when sailors used to get rations of whatever alcohol they could get on the ship, typically rum or gin, I think were most common. Unlike nowadays, there's ways to see how strong your spirit is. Most importantly, it's all regulated, so you see it on the bottle, and you pretty much know it's going to be accurate. Back then, they were getting these things in barrels. There was no chain of custody from producer to end user. God knows how many times it was tampered with, or the bung was popped open and there was something added, or water put in, or whatever. So the sailors were very sensitive. Being a sailor in the Royal Navy in the 17 or 1800s was not fun. But don't mess with those guys' rations. So they used to get a tot, I don't know if it was a half a pint or whatever it was, of spirits a day, I believe. But they had no way of knowing if it was at 100 proof or 105 or 95 or whatever it was. So somebody somewhere determined that if you take the ration and you mix it with some gunpowder and put a match to it, there's going to be a binary thing. It's going to do nothing, or it's going to ignite. And they figured, okay, that's our one measure. And it's a binary. Is it above that point where it will ignite, or is it below? And somebody determined that at 114 proof, if the supply officer or whomever got that barrel and got it at 114 proof, you kind of proofed it down to the limit, where any lower, then you'd have some pissed off sailors. So that's where Navy Strength came from, as we understand it. As far as why we do it, because you don't really see it in whiskey as much. You much more often see, something in the 80s, 90s, or 100, and then maybe up to a cask strength, which could be anywhere from 110, 115 up to 125, 130. We originally, up until about maybe a year and a half ago, we had our original flagship was 86 proof, as opposed to the 95 you had tonight, and we had a cask strength in Blue Label, just like our Navy Strength Blue Label we're drinking now. So Arch and I, we did a couple of things. We took over the business from Golden Distilling. We were using smaller barrels. The immediate intent to kind of phase out of that as soon as we could. We got good whiskey out of those barrels, but we knew that we wanted to be playing with the big boys and the big standard barrels that take longer to age. So when we finally phased out of our small barrels, we knew a couple of things were going to happen. One, the profile was going to change in a good way, right? It's going to keep progressing, and we knew there was going to be a significant change from when we phased out the small barrels and phased in the 53s. We knew we wanted to do a little refresh on the branding anyway, so we were going to make some changes there. And we also really always loved the idea of having a single barrel cask strength program. We did single barrels for stores, but like having our own single barrel cask strength program, kind of like Four Roses has. So we took the opportunity to, instead of making those three changes separately over a period of a year or two and just confusing the shit out of everybody, we're like, let's just make all those changes at once. So we took that, we said, hey, we want to have single barrel cask strength, but we didn't want to have a single barrel cask strength and a regular cask strength. That was just kind of like more than we wanted to do. So we said, hey, Arch and I would be sipping our cask strength, and we'd almost always add a little water or add an ice cube to it because we liked it tamed just a little bit. So we said, hey, we're probably drinking this probably in the 110, 115, whatever range anyway. That's where we like it. That's where we think it shines the best. We want a clear room in our portfolio for the single barrel cask strength program. And we're Navy guys. And to our knowledge, there's not a lot of people doing Navy strength whiskeys. So that was kind of like, hey, fuck it, we'll just go ahead and do it. And that's what we did. So we've been very pleased we did it. We love it at 114. It's right on brand. I think it's really a nice proof for our whiskey. And then it left room in the portfolio now that we had this single barrel cask strength program. So it really accomplished a lot for us. And with that, I'll give you
guys should try some co-marketing with like USAA for this.
I like that. I'm a member. Get Gronk in here.
How long is the
That's funny.
Navy
That's
strength
funny.
aged?
I'm sorry, was there a question I missed?
Yeah, how long is the Navy strength aged?
It's the exact. So that's a great question. So how long is the Navy strength age? So with our old cask strength and then with our Navy strength now, what we've determined for us has been the best approach. Has been it's the identical profile as the 95, just proofed out. So we've considered doing things. Some companies will have a, whatever their flagship proof is. And then for their cask strength, it might be a different profile because they find that different ages shine better at different proofs. We found with our profile, we found no discernible reason to do that. So yeah, it's the exact same 4 to almost 8-year-old profile that we had with the 95, just not proofed down as much. It's as simple as that. How do you guys find the 114?
This is flagship on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
I get a little more spice on it, I think, for me.
Definitely more spice.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, almost pushing that cinnamon flavor, I feel like.
That, in my opinion, and I'll put an asterisk with everything I say here, is that, I'm a B- history major in college. So whatever I say that has anything to do with chemistry, I would look it up after I say it and make sure it's not bullshit. But the number of the char levels, when you look at, the number 3 char is the most commonly used in bourbon, as I understand it. We use mostly number 4. We have some number 3s. Actually, I was sipping on the number 3 today. But the number 4 char, as I understand it, the number 3s will be maybe the flavors that will be peaking at the number 3 level of char will be maybe the vanillas and things like that. And we still get plenty of that as well. But the spiciness, both the white pepper spice and the cinnamon and baking spice and allspice, those things I think peak a little bit more at the number 4 char. So I think that's why that cinnamon is not as prominent. Eugenol, I think, is that kind of all spicy character to it. So and that ties in really well later as we go into the finishes. I think those spicy notes kind of do really well with the finishes as well.
But I'm definitely picking up more of the char than I would on your standard bourbon.
And how does that sit with you? Is that something you enjoy, or do you wish it was a little less?
I mean, I'm trying to get out of bourbon mode and back into Scotch mode, I guess. So I guess I don't mind it if I think about it that way.
Sure. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I mean, I love that. No one whiskey can be all things to all people. Right. So I love hearing the feedback on whether it's somebody likes it or not. I'm not saying it.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say it feels much more like a bourbon drinker's malt than most malts out there when we're not dealing with what we're about to taste, the finished whiskeys. I haven't tried the Navy before. I really like it. But if you put that and I think that's because I'm more used to tasting that number 4 char in American whiskeys that are not malt. But yeah, it's quite good. It's just kind of almost a trick of being more I think more non-American single malt drinkers could be converted to be American single malt drinkers by trying a product like this, because it's more similar to the flavor profile they're already used to.
Well, thank you, Michael. And you cut out there a little bit, but I got the gist of what you were saying, and I appreciate the comment. And that's, it's a phrase that we often use, is actually, when we think about we can have this conversation right here and we can have a deep, in-depth conversation, but, think about when we're having one of our employees at a store, right? And they only have a consumer's attention for a few seconds. What are the things that they can communicate very succinctly to that consumer about what they're about to taste? And a bourbon drinker single malt is one of the 3 things that we, in one of those very brief interactions is that we want them to share. And not that we're trying to be a bourbon, we're not, but we are trying to provide and we're bourbon drinkers first and foremost. Arch and I, as whiskey drinkers, so we wanted to provide, what that bourbon drinker might reach for when he or she wants something just a little bit different. So yeah, I appreciate the comment so much, and it. And I think in the last one of these we did, I think we had a similar conversation about, so I know that Arch, my business partner, he doesn't like the term, I would say gateway, but a gateway to, for Scotch drinkers, a gateway into bourbon, and a bourbon drinkers, a gateway into Scotch, whatever. I do. I mean, I don't think a gateway is a bad thing. I think it's if it can open somebody's palate up to be interested in trying something new, that's a great place for us to be. So.
Well, what I'm getting off it too is it's this. You can use it in a cocktail that's well stirred without losing the flavor. You know, when you make a cocktail and you well stir it, you kind of lose that flavor. Then the flavor profile doesn't hold up. I feel like the Navy Strength will, in when you mix it with a cocktail.
Yeah, here we have a bar. We use our 95 proof for our standard old fashioned, but the Mark old fashioned is just 114 proof instead. The Marquee, as the bartenders call it. But yeah, it just stands up so well. And where I get especially in the old fashioned cocktail, but really in a lot of them is the dark kind of cocoa notes that I find in there. And I forgot to mention that earlier. Actually, I'm glad that came up. That we're a single malt. We only use malted barley. But for those who are listening who may not be familiar, malted barley is very versatile because compared to corn, and I love corn whiskey, but corn, it's different types of corn, absolutely. But corn is in my opinion, it's a little more uniform as far as the difference in flavor. It's coming off the plant. It's already got a high sugar content. But whereas with barley, it doesn't. It's high starch content, so you have to malt it. So you have to soak the grain, trick the grain to think it's time to sprout, and the grain naturally starts to convert those starches to sugar, and then they dry it out. And then in the process of drying it out, you can get dramatically different flavors. So one way that we're all familiar with is the peaty, earthy, smoky Islas, right? Well, that's because when they dry it out, they allow that kind of earthy, dank peat smoke to filter up through the grain bed, and the grain literally absorbs it. You can taste it in the grain. But also, for us, we use two types of malted barley. So it's a single malt. You can use more than one type of malted barley as long as that's the only type of grain you use. So we use 90% of what we do is a two-row pale malt. To try to, for those who aren't home brewers or distillers, the way I would describe that is if you were to take that grain before we make the whiskey, it's going to taste kind of like grape nut cereal. And if you know grape nuts, when I was a kid, that was like the biggest trick I ever played on grape nuts. This tastes nothing like grape or nuts. But it's like grainy, mildly sweet, I don't want to say earthy, but it's a pleasant flavor. And then the 10% of our mash bill is called a crystal malt. It's roasted at a deeper, higher temperature, and some of those sugars that are forming in the malting process start to caramelize, and you lose some alcohol yield because those sugars are no longer fermentable by the yeast, edible, but you get a really rich flavor. So if you were to take that grain and put it in your mouth before we made our whiskey, it tastes like raisin bran flakes. So just all that is to say that same grain processed two different ways gives very, very different flavors. And that cocoa, that C120, that 10% of our mash bill really carries through strong, and that's where that kind of cocoa character comes from.
So two things. One, Cinnamon Toast Crunch all day for cereal. Right?
Nice. As far as what you're tasting, or as far as your fave?
No, fave.
Oh, got it.
And second, I'm really relating to the gateway comment, because the Navy Strength had a little hint of that Kentucky hug to it.
That's right on brand for us. I mean, yeah, thank you. So we're, I think we think we're in the right spot, right? It's a tough category. We're thrilled to be in the category. We wouldn't want to be in any other category because, frankly, if we were making bourbon or rye right now, and we're making a tiny bit of rye, but we're competing against a group of companies who've been doing this extremely well for hundreds of years. And that's great. That's why, I love their products, right? But in American Single Malt, little tiny Old Line is probably, at least by virtue of how many barrels we have in the warehouse, we're probably one of the top 5 producers as far as like opportunity for growth. Probably the largest one that is independent still, frankly. And that's a cool position to be in. Super cool. It's great. But it's also a challenge in that, if you think about your local liquor store on a busy Saturday in October, let's say 500 people walk through the door. At this point in time, I'm really lucky if a single one of them is there to buy American Single Malt. They're there to buy their bourbon or their rye or their scotch or their beer or their Truly or wine, something else. So the consumer is going to the point of sale with something else in mind. And we are trying to find a way to kind of jump in on that transaction, which is kind of I would say unique, it's a different challenge than a bourbon drinker going for a bourbon and trying a new bourbon is a little bit of an easier transition, I think, from the company's perspective than a bourbon drinker going for a bourbon and then leaving with a single malt. And that's a different, even though we provide a lot of that flavor that the person's used to, it's still that added challenge from a sales perspective. But
it's getting consideration and share of mind.
it is definitely starting to. It's gotten infinitely better. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when we first rolled out, how many people would be like, "Oh, you're making Scotch?" It's like, "Well, no, we're making American Single Malt," and explain it like, "Oh, you're making Scotch." It's like, okay, and people were just not only not knowing it, they were telling me how wrong I was on what we were making. And now most people, I'd say every whiskey aficionado has heard of it a lot. And even I'd say people who are not whiskey aficionados, who are just kind of casual consumers, I'd say a vast majority of them have at least heard of the category and probably dipped their toe in it in some way. But and actually I have more to say on that, but I don't want to hold up the train too long. So with that, I think number 3 is the bottled and bond. Is that right, Kyan? That's right. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We're gonna go to the bottled and bond, and then I'll pick up that conversation where we were before a second ago. But this is this kind of silvery silver label, and what's going to be different about this one is this is the only one of the 6 tonight that we distilled here in Baltimore, because like I said earlier, we do a lot of our small batch distillation here, and our bulk of our production we do with the Middle West guys. So this is going to be double pot distilled, in contrast to the previous and the follow-ons that are going to be column distilled and then pot distilled. So this is also the outlier in another way, in that when we phased away from the smaller barrels, we were not quite ready to let go of the 30-gallon barrels, because we love that flavor profile. So when we produce stuff in-house, it is almost always going into a 30-gallon barrel here, and then everything else is going into ASBs, 53 gallons. So this is going to be a different experience on several levels. Double pot still whiskey, I think it's probably going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit more, touch more buttery, and the oak character is going to be more aggressive. And for us, it's that balance of getting a lot of the oak character without too many tannins, because that'll obviously ruin your day if you over oak it, which we certainly don't think we did, but that's up to us, or up to you guys to determine. But it's a really nice whiskey. We were very pleased with this. This is my business partner's favorite thing we've done. My favorite is the Navy Strength. Yeah, I'll let you guys jump in on that. But that is, this is our second release of the Bottled and Bond. This is a 5-year-old.
This is delicious, and no headphones with bad mics, hopefully. This must have been what I first tasted when I tasted Old Line, because the mouthfeel, like Kyan said early, is just the star first, and then the flavor is fantastic. I think you got the balance of wood really well balanced.
Thank you.
100%.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm getting, but I feel like I'm getting almost like a bazooka bubblegum smell right on the nose, right at the front.
Ooh.
So
I got bubblegum as well.
Somebody,
You smell the bubblegum? Yeah.
I got the bubblegum as well, just in the taste. Yeah.
I have never heard that before until 2 weeks ago on this same with Cayenne. I believe it was here. Somebody else did the same thing, and I had never heard that before. That's wild that I'm hearing it, twice. I haven't picked up on that, but there's something there clearly. Actually, I got to go.
It's interesting because Bren 10 from France has a reputation of having that bubblegum kind of flavor to it too, and it was attributed at times to the double pot still that they use. So it could be something in the reaction between a still and the bottle.
Absolutely, no, that makes complete logical sense to me. I just kicking myself for not having a bottle of it at my fingertips right now. Right between my legs. I knew I had one out here somewhere.
It's either that or Cayenne is just rinsing the bottle and bond through some bubblegum filters before he puts into the bottles.
So one thing, I probably picked the wrong time to bring it up, because I don't personally get it as much in the bottled and bond. I get it more on the first two. But another thing that I love about our malt in particular is there's a really nice kind of stone fruit. Sometimes it comes across as dark, like chocolate covered cherry to me. Sometimes I'll taste a barrel. I was telling somebody earlier today, some barrel samples will taste like peach iced tea to me, with that, the sweetness from the vanillins and the distillate, the tannins from the oak being kind of the tea, if you will. And then it's kind of a nectarine or, semi-ripe peach. Not every time, like when it hits me. And I don't typically get it as much. I think if it's in there, I think the oak kind of outshouts it sometimes. But on the 53-gallon barrels, I pick up on them.
I don't know. On the Navy, I got like some cherry on the nose.
Sure, that's probably the same thing we're picking up. Yeah, that kind of fruitiness. Now, before, if anybody has any, thank you for the comments on the bottled and bond. If you have any questions on it, I'm happy to answer them.
I like the mouthfeel of the bottled and bond. It has a little bit more oiliness compared to the Navy or the other strain. I think it brings out a bit more complexity, and the cinnamon back end actually has a little bit more pronounced compared to the last two.
I buy that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this also a single barrel?
This is not a single barrel. No, this is, I don't know if I can tell from the label how many it was, but it definitely was not a single barrel. I'd say, if I had to guess, it was probably 10 barrels. Yeah. Well, actually, no more than 10.
The second one we had, the Navy, that was a single barrel, right?
No, actually, none of the ones today are single barrel.
Oh, so did you mention that you were going for a single barrel sort of cask strength
yes,
profile?
I did. In the kind of the discussion on why we have the Navy strength, part of that is that we used to have a cask strength, regular cask strength. We wanted that to be a single barrel cask strength. So we kind of we nudged that down, the regular kind of high proof offering to 114 proof. And then we opened up that range of that cask strength range for a single barrel program, which we don't have in front of us tonight.
Okay, no worries.
One question I have about all the barrels or the bottles. Can you tell us the Bravo Zulu story here?
Yeah,
all the bottles.
Absolutely. So Bravo Zulu. So for those who are not holding a bottle, you probably can't see this, but I'll try that. At the bottom of the label here, it says Bravo Zulu, and then on the front, those flags, if you can see them, the red and then the colored one, those are the flags for B, Bravo, and Z, Zulu in the kind of military flag alphabet. I'm sure there's a better name than that. But so in the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard, I suppose, it's a way of saying well done. So if you were to get an award, we say, hey, Lieutenant McLaughlin on this date, blah, 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 you did this and blah, 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 Bravo Zulu, Admiral Smith, whatever. So, or like on the, you do something good and the ship's, radio, intercom, hey, a big Bravo Zulu to this unit for doing this. So back in the day when ships would communicate with flags before radios or during radio silence within visual contact, it was a way of the flagship communicating to another ship, good job. So it's kind of become part of Navy culture, and we put it on there. It's kind of a nice Easter egg for us. People who have been in the Navy, or the Marine Corps, the Sea Services, recognize it and kind of usually put two and two together, like, oh, hey, this is one of us making it. And we also like that people ask, because we didn't want to put it on there and have an explanation. It just felt like a little too on the nose. But having it on there and having people ask and hear the story, or you buy a bottle for your Navy buddy and be like, oh man, it's got Bravo Zulu on it. There's it's a nice connection, I think, to have to our history without being too on the nose.
It's a really nice.
I like it. It's
really nice.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. We've been very pleased with that. It's been a nice kind of part of our branding and, again, part of our DNA, if you will.
Do you notice, besides the difference in size of the batches and stills, do you notice significant differences in the spirit that you're distilling in Maryland versus?
We do. I think it's meaningfully different. I'd say the way I describe it is they're definitely siblings, right? They're definitely, like, you line them up and like You know, it's like me and my brother. I go to a bar back in Boston, and they'll be like, "Hey, Maddie." I'm like, "No, I'm the other one." You know, like like we're close enough, we're related, but we're not. But they're definitely different, which is important to us. You know, we didn't want it to be night and day. We did want it to be different because you know.
But your mash bill is staying consistent between the two locations.
It is almost out there. I may have this backwards. This is where Arch or Jerry would correct me if they were here. Here, you know, here we're 90-10, like I mentioned earlier, on the C120 being 10% and the pale malt being 90%. I believe it's 87-13 out there. And that came about from more of an operational reason than a flavor reason. It's a very, very minor change. But it was something about like when Arch was ordering 50-gallon bags of grain here, it made the math work better, and we tried it, and it worked well. And being a little bit different from Middle West is already what we're doing anyway. So yeah, it's almost identical, but slightly different. I wish I could say it was just like romantic story about why it's 3% different, but I'd be bullshitting you if I did. But yeah, it's definitely different. And that's again kind of why we're doing the 30-gallon barrels for a couple of reasons. But one of them is, hey, we're already going to be different from Middle West. Might as well embrace something even more different. You know, have it just kind of not try to match them up completely, because we can't blend them together and still be a single malt. You know, once we take a barrel distilled by Middle West and a barrel distilled here and marry them together, by the definition that we've all bought into, that becomes something other than a single malt. That becomes a blend of malts, which is not a bad thing. It could be a great whiskey. It just, you can't call it single malt. So for us, we can't marry those barrels together anyway, so might as well make them different.
How does the angel share differ between the two distilleries / barrel sizes? That's
a great question. Actually, you know what? So just so I keep the train going, let's go to the next pour, and then I will come right back to that question. So I don't want to. I won't talk too long. So next one was, correct me if I'm wrong, the port cask. Is that right, Cayenne? Mm-hmm. All right. So for those watching at home, this is we call it our double oak series. I'm horrible at holding this up for the camera. We call it our double oak series. And the reason we call our finishes double oak is because somebody at the TTB, the federal government, once told us that American single malts were not allowed to use the word finish on the label, which is not true. But once somebody tells you no, getting a yes is doubly hard. So we use a term, the best approximation for what finishing is we could find is double oak, which double oak to me as a consumer connotes that it's in virgin oak twice. But that was, we were out of airspeed and ideas. We had to call it something. So we call it double oak because it's in more than one oak barrel. And this first one here is finished in tawny port. The one that I have in my hand, which I think is the same one you're drinking, was aged 5 years in virgin oak, and it was more than one barrel, but the finishing time was a range of 19 to 25 months in the tawny port casks. And for all of our barrel finishes and the bottle and bond and all that stuff, you can't really see the detail there, but we just put all the dates, the mash bill, the entry proofs, exit proofs, all that stuff in the back there, because that's more interesting than a blurb that I wrote that no one cares about. So with that, while you guys sip the port, I want to come back to the question about the angel share. For those watching at home, you probably all have heard the term, but in case anybody hasn't, angel share refers to the fact that you fill a barrel up to the tip top when you fill it, and then through a combination of evaporation and absorption into the wood and maybe leakage, what you get out is something less. So what we found, interestingly, no matter what, well, I'll start with the blunt description. Whatever barrel size we use, whether it was a little 5-gallon barrel or a 10-gallon barrel, so 5 gallons we did for like a year and a half. 10s we did 2 to 3 years. 30s we did 4 to 5 years, and 53s we do 4 to 8. Whatever, we found that we get about, on average, about a 70-71% yield. Whether it's a 5-gallon for a year and a half or a 53-gallon for 6 or 7. That's just kind of where it all averages out for us, which is kind of wild to me, but it's just the way it works. So, the small barrels, you lose a ton of absorption if you would, as far as a ratio perspective, but you only have it in there for a year and a half, so you're not getting a lot of evaporative loss. Whereas 53s, per gallon, you're getting less absorption into the wood, but you're going to have it in there for much longer. And that's where you get that evaporative loss. So for the 53-gallon barrels, we found that we lose about 10% year one is what we estimate, with absorption into the wood. And again, some evaporation, maybe a little leakage because the barrel wasn't quite fully swelled with the liquid in. And then about 3 to 4% thereafter, probably closer to 4. So yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing as far as the losses. We haven't aged anything yet longer than, well, there's an asterisk here, but let's just say for now, let's just say 8 years is our longest. We've actually done a 10-year-old, but that was there was only 3 barrels. So we haven't seen data yet on the older barrels. And to take that one step further, we also don't know how long we really should be keeping our whiskey in the barrel. I mean, right now, 8 years, it's still great. But this is virgin oak in the American climate with a non-climate controlled warehouse, so not too dissimilar from a Kentucky aging style. So, I mean, we may not want to go 15 on these. There's not a lot of 15-year-old American whiskeys that I, go crazy for. There's a lot of 8-year-olds I love. So, I don't know. That's a whole different topic. But
are you seeing any difference in proof out of the barrel?
Yep. So the entry proof for us has always been 120 on the dot. That's what Bob and Jim did, and that's one of the things that we saw no reason to mess with. The mash bill we basically didn't change. The yeast we didn't change, or not meaningfully, and then the proof. So we could go in the barrel as high as 125 if we wanted to, just like a bourbon, but we do 120. And what we're getting out on the non-barrel finished product will be ranged from like 123 to 125 typically. After that kind of 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Older, typically a little higher. So just, so we're losing more water than we are ethanol in the evaporation process. Now the barrel finishes, those are coming out. So we're taking it, so in at 120 into the primary barrel, out at 124, let's say, after the primary aging, directly over to a finishing barrel. And then it's coming out like 118 to 121, which the only explanation we have is it's the residual wine in the barrel that helps bring it down in proof. But what blows my mind is that we dump the wine out. There's the wine. Well, not always, but if there's any in there, it's minimal. Like you're legally allowed to have 2.4%, I think, of the finishing barrel can have, like, let's say with a sherry finish. You could actually literally dump sherry in there if you wanted, as long as it doesn't go above 2.4% of the barrel volume, or the volume of liquid in there. I believe you're compliant. We don't do that. That would be a sherry nuclear bomb, but you could, right? So the point there is we sometimes leave a little in there, but not much. So the math does not make sense to me as far as why the proof goes down that much, but it consistently drops by 4 to 6 points over a year, 2 years.
And that 124 out, that's the same in Baltimore and in Ohio?
Well, it probably would be, but everything we make in Ohio makes its way to Baltimore usually within 6 months of being distilled. So everything ages here for the vast majority of its life. So I think it would probably be similar, but I couldn't say for certain.
Oh, and I thought it was aging in Ohio. That makes
no,
sense.
I'm sorry if I didn't explain that clearly. Yes, it distilled in Ohio, but a lot of it is. But once it's distilled, we get it here as soon as we can. Because we manage the whole aging process here.
Makes more sense. Okay, thank you.
As for this port that we're tasting right now, I am getting that very fall orchard smell. This is definitely one of those sipping that next to a campfire fall seasonal whiskeys, I feel like.
Yeah, it's this is one that I found that is it's certainly not subtle. And the port is some people go ape shit for it. They just absolutely their favorite. And some people find it to be a little more of a fruit forward whiskey, that this is not their cup of tea, which is, I totally get that too. I like it a lot. The ones that we have coming, I think there's a progression here that I think Cayenne did really well as far as what you're going to taste. But yeah, I really like the port finish. But I think you're right, like a fall night, fire, that makes a lot of sense. But it's definitely not subtle. It's definitely in your face is probably not the right word to use, but it's definitely not shy.
Where do your port, sherry, and Madeira barrels come from?
So we typically don't know, which is unfortunate. So most of these barrel brokers that we get our barrels from have NDAs in place where we won't know. Occasionally we get lucky and we'll see a sort of stamp or a marking where we can, kind of put two and two together. Most of the time we can't. So what we do is we order the barrels from our broker. We use a place called Rocky Mountain Barrel Company out of Denver, I guess, but they ship their barrels in through Norfolk, Virginia. So they come from Norfolk to us. And we order the barrels we want, and they come to us sealed and I believe with argon or some inert gas, and we get to smell them and make sure that they're in good condition, that the character is what we want, and we can send them back if we don't want them. That's really the only input we get. We get to order it, and we get to say yes or no when it arrives. We don't have the pedigree per se. I asked, I think Kyan heard me say this last time. I asked the broker question. Our first batch of port barrels, hey, do we know anything about where they came from? And he goes, yeah, the Douro Valley, which if anybody knows port, that's where port comes from. It's kind of like, kind of a screw you, like, hey man, go pack sand. So we weren't able to get much information out of them, unfortunately. So yeah, I wish we had more. Some days we get bigger. I'd like to have a relationship with specific wineries. We're just too tiny to have that right now.
Now, the port barrels you're using, is this all first fill from port, or are you reusing these barrels for future runs?
No, this is first fill from port, and to date it has been all tawny, with one exception. We did one ruby port barrel, which actually came out really well. There was a barrel pick that went to New York, up to the Rochester area. But yeah, we do all tawny port first fill, and then we will sell them to a broker when we're done, and they'll go wherever. We actually sell them for about half. So it's not bad.
Any plans of ruby port?
We've done one ruby up in for a barrel pick, and it really came out nicely. We don't have any in the hopper right now, but we did enjoy the ruby. It was a nice barrel pick. So we'll probably do it again, but the tawny has really that's really what we gravitated towards that.
And Mike, Mark, were you able to find the Sauternes cask in your inventory there?
Oh, when we talked about last time?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, so where did I find it, or where did we get the casks?
No, do you have any? Because there's not in the market. I tried.
Correct. Yeah. No, I'll be. I gotta get the forklift out and pull some barrels off top of it. But we have at least 2, if not 4 of them out there. So I want to get some to you just as a barrel pull, just as a give it a try.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
But the Sauternes, yeah, that, like we said last time, that pick came out way better than I expected.
Sauternes is one of my favorite finishes. Yeah.
And was it you saying last time that you were recommending that we put some of our peated into Sauternes, or was that somebody else?
Yeah. Me and Elan, we both were of the opinion that you should do some peated Sauternes. Yeah.
I think we will. So our peated, what we're learning is the aging process seems to be meaningfully different for our peated than for our non-peated. To the point where I think that peated is going to need, not need, but will benefit from a healthy amount than we do for the non-peated. So putting that out of virgin oak into a Sauternes could be good.
Maybe you can approach it in a different way. You can use a PT cask, and then so instead of going all out peated, you could use a PT cask and then finish it in a Sauternes.
It's also a blending option too, right? Finish the non-peated in the Sauternes and blend it in with some peated too. There's a lot of options. You got to come to Baltimore and mess around with the barrels, man. That's it's an open invitation.
Yeah, sure.
And this is anticipating the fact that your sherry and Madeira will be as awesome as the others. But have you played with blending among the different wine finished whiskeys already? So
played with in a way that, like, just kind of messing around, absolutely. In a professional, well thought out way, not really. But we do have for I think it's a November, maybe October release. So we're actually already feeling pressure on this one. Is we want to put out. We have it on our release calendar as a cigar blend, whether we call it that or not. But basically, the concept being, we've got a lot of finishing barrels here some of which are a little more experimental than others. And there's a lot we could do. So yeah, that is rising rapidly to a top of our operational priority list, is to do just that.
Cool. Because here in the Midwest, we many of us, I think, are already fans of single malt that does that exact thing. The quintessential from Iowa.
Cedar Ridge, right?
Cedar Ridge. And so, and they've proven that to be not only successful as far as flavor, but also commercially so. So it'd be very interesting to see what would happen with others playing with that kind of blend. Although they have direct line to their winery, which is easier for them to do.
Well, they're doing great things too in general. And yes, I agree. We're excited to do it. And it's just going to be a fun process too. It's just sometimes we have to get out of our own way. Like, okay, put down the accounting for a day that can wait and do the fun part of the business, So yes, the answer is yes. Something will be coming out later this year, unless we completely fall on our face. That will be just what you're suggesting, that blend of finishes. So, all right. Well, so I guess next up is going to be the sherry. Is that correct? Do I have that right, Kyan?
Yeah, sherry and then Madeira. I think, sherry and then Madeira.
So I got the sherry here. So this here is our first iteration of Pedro Jimenez PX sherry. We typically have done Oloroso. We've done all Oloroso to date. And for those watching who may not be as familiar, sherry, just like port, it's a fortified wine. Comes from Spain, and it will be. There's different, I'd say varietals or different types. There's 7 or 8 types, of which they range from dry to very sweet to in the middle. Oloroso, the one that we have used to date, and we still do have more. It's a great finish. It tends to be a little bit more medium sweet and kind of nutty, with mild fruit notes. And then Pedro Jimenez is on the sweet, maybe the sweetest, and it's going to be more fruit forward and rich and sweet. And I think this one knocked it out of the park. I love it. I mean, I love the Oloroso. I always will, but I think I'm a convert on the PX. So I'm gonna grab some myself here if I can find a bottle. Let's see. There's one.
I'm a big sucker for PX.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. It's
proofs are the same on all the wood finished whiskeys?
Yes, actually, thank you for asking that. For us, for all of our double oak, unless it's a barrel pick, it's always 100. For us, 100 is almost foolproof. Like, it's really hard to go wrong at 100 proof. So for us, it's a way to not overthink it and just be like, hey, at 100, it maybe, for some whiskeys, maybe 105 would be better. I mean, better. 100 is hard to go wrong, so we just kind of go right down the middle. And then barrel picks will be that 118 to 121, whatever it comes out at.
I do got to say, I think I know where this lineup's going, but this one is probably one of my favorites so far.
Totally agree.
Yeah, this one's special. I like it a lot. I'd probably give this a top 5 of what we've done for me. I'm not getting it right now. I probably get it more in the port, but sometimes in the sherry I get it is almost like a holiday fruitcake, which I sometimes hesitate to say because some people are like, oh fuck, I got fruitcake I eat, but like when you break it down, there's actually a lot of good flavors here. There's kind of molasses notes, there's vanilla, there's nuts, there's dried fruits, and all those things that right now it's not really striking me like that, but sometimes I'll sip this and I'll get that.
I pick up what you're saying. I get a pecan almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can see that. Pecan, maybe walnut.
So I went
nice little sweetness.
Yeah, and what Anthony said about this being one of his top, I'm like, yep, for me too. But I went back to the bottled in bond because that was the leader up until that point for me. And it's really interesting when I tasted them side by side. The spirit still comes through the PX, even though we're getting a lot of PX finish. Whereas with the port, I felt like the port dominated the flavor profile and covered things up. I think with this one, you're getting the spirit, the grain through the sherry.
I couldn't agree more. That's where the port is I don't say love or hate rum, love or some people, because I think some people it's just more than they want, and it does kind of become not one dimensional by any means, but it does become balanced, or maybe slightly balanced, more weighted more towards the finish. But yeah, this one I think is really nicely balanced. And the Madeira, I'll be curious to get people's thoughts on that one. I'll leave it at that. I think I'll be curious to hear what you guys say on the Madeira too. This is always fun to hear what other people taste.
So let's move to Madeira then.
All right, the Madeira. So this is the last one here again. But I'll make you dizzy here with the camera. So Madeira, for those who are watching, Madeira is an island owned by Portugal, off the coast of Africa, and they make their own version of fortified wine that's different from port. It's made with different grape varietals. It's aged in a much hotter climate. There's a lot more oxidation, I believe. So the simpleton for me the way my kind of simple palate works is, on average for me, a port is like jam. And on average, Madeira for me is more like raisiny. That's very oversimplified, but just for those who aren't sipping, as far as the finishes, that's kind of how I wrap my brain around it. And this one has kind of helped put us on the map with. Fred Minnick is a big fan, and I know that he's got a big following, and we've made the top 100 whiskeys at least once, if not twice, with this one. And not that should affect anybody's opinion on it, just that it helps get us on people's radars, which is nice.
Mark, quit being shy, because this one, Best American Single Malt, double platinum winner, 90 points, and it looks like a silver medal winner as well.
It's done very well. Yeah.
No need to be shy. Claim your awards.
Well, I guess I don't want I never want to be one of those guys who says, I made this award, you guys should like it, because you might not like it. But it is, we do like to, we are proud of those accolades, and we hope that if nothing else, it gives people a reason to maybe pick up the bottle and try it if they weren't going to otherwise. Yeah.
I definitely understand why Minnick liked it. It's for a bourbon drinker, this is a natural progression into single malt. This is amazing. Bourbon drinkers, yeah. So somebody coming from bourbon, Madeira is the way to go if they want to try a finished whiskey. Someone who's, somebody who's embedded in Scotch or single malt whiskeys, I would say sherry and port. I mean, they're like.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. This would be up there with the PX, would be in my top 5 as well. So this, the PX, the Navy Strength, that you guys heard me say.
This is brilliant on nose. This is really lovely nose.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, I really like this because even more so than the sherry, the grain comes through, and so you really get this nice roundness from the Madeira, but you still get the backbone of the first 3 that we tasted. And so and it's super nicely balanced.
I hate to be the odd man here, but I'm not the fan of the nose on this one, but the flavor is phenomenal. I really, really like this. As cayenne nose, I'm a bourbon weeded guy, and this is right up my alley. But the nose, there's just something off on it for me. I can't pinpoint it, but let me keep smelling. I'll figure it out.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm not getting it today, but once in a while, and this is one of my favorite things we've done, but once in a while the nose comes across a little bit musty. And I'm not getting it today, but I wonder if maybe that might be what you're getting. Maybe not.
What was that you cut out when you said
so
that?
once in a while, I'm not getting it today, but once in a while the nose on this I'll get a little hint of something being a little musty. I wonder if that might be what you're getting. I'm not getting it right now, but in the past I have on this one, depends on my palate.
It does kind of come off that way, more the earthy.
But I don't
getting
get it on
off it.
palate. I get it a little in the nose sometimes. But again, not today for me.
But the flavor is amazing.
Tony, was it a hot day today in Utah, in Salt Lake City?
No, we only got to like 74 today, so it was nice and cool. The humidity levels in this room are pretty rising, which could be a factor because I am on a west-facing room, so maybe that could be coming into play.
Yeah, because when you said nose, the only reason weather is a big weather has a big effect on how you smell things.
Absolutely.
Up to this point,
I do have my coffee here. I'm cleaning my sinuses in between each one, but yeah, I'm just something. Could be the humidity in this room.
Just out of curiosity. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
On the port, sherry, and Madeira, is it pot still or column still?
So these are all going to be the column pot 1 and 2, the stripping on the column, and then the finishing on the pot for the finishes.
And they're all that 5-year or we covered that with port, but I don't think we talked about it with sherry. Or
you're correct. We did not. So yeah, the port was 5 years. Excuse me. To your point, 19 to 25 months in the range on the finishing. The sherry was a range of 4 to 6 year old barrels, and then finished for 1 year on the nose in the sherry cask, and then the Madeira was identical to the port. That makes a lot of sense because we actually filled them at the same time. So that was 5 years in bourbon, and then 19 to 25 on the Madeira cask. So the Madeira and the port line up identical, and the sherry is a little different.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And
Mark,
go ahead.
No, Mike, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask because I think you might have mentioned this up front, but when did Old Line start distilling their own spirit? Because you've mentioned 8 years old, but I don't know what the oldest stocks you have in your warehouses might be.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we took over Golden Distillery. They started in 2008 or 9. We moved out there in 2015 and apprenticed. So we were making whiskey out there on the little open flame heated 60-gallon pot still with Bob. And then all that sold through because that was mostly going to small barrels. So that had to get out of the oak pretty quickly. So that's kind of all been consumed for the most part. We started producing at Middle West in 2016, ended in Q4, and then started producing in Old Line in it would be probably mid 2017. So the oldest stuff that we have that we've made, if you include the stuff we make in Middle West, where we go out there, and actually the first few batches we were out there working hand in hand, shoveling grain in the auger and all that, will be hitting 8 years old on August 10th. Will be the oldest stuff that we've made once we kind of parted ways with Bob and bought the business, and Bob's still our friend, not parted ways that way, but just as far as took off on our own. I mentioned earlier we had a 10-year-old. So when Bob and Jim were making small barrel whiskey, but they did fill 3 53-gallon barrels with their distillate. So when we bought the business, they were like 3 or 4 years old. So we let them go to 9 years, and they came out wonderful. It's called Golden Edition. There's a couple of random bottles that I come across once in a blue moon. I'll see one and I'll buy it. Yeah, I think I over-answered your question, so I apologize.
Okay. I think we are all whiskey geeks, so over-answering is great.
Well, one thing I don't want to forget, by the way, is a shameless plug. For anybody who is tasting or watching that does want to get a hold of anything, we via our website, oldlinespirits.com, we can ship via a third party to 40 out of 50 states. So yeah, please, if it's anything here you liked and you want to get your hands on it, you can go to our website, click shop, and it'll tell you right away if you're in one of those states. We can't, unfortunately. I think Utah is one of them we can't, Anthony, but I think most states we can. So if anybody wants to try anything, it's flat shipping, so one bottle is the same as like 6 bottles. So anyway, just so you guys know, it's there if you want it. That's my shameless sales plug.
Story of my life. Nothing can come to Utah.
Stick around today, man.
I need these essential oils shipped to me. So we got to.
Yeah.
No gloves.
There's a way around. There's a way around. Anyway.
Yeah.
So
I
anyway.
appreciate the story being shared about this. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple things. I thought the last three were incredibly balanced. Just compared to the first three, all the finished whiskeys were just amazing. But also, I wasn't expecting that. And that I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, just because as an American whiskey being finished in wine barrels, it's not something I've ever seen, so I wasn't expecting that. So I'm sort of conflicted there that they're American whiskey, but they're so well balanced, and I don't want to say the reason is because they were finished in French barrels. And I'm just wondering, you mentioned cigar blend finish as maybe one option. I'd love to see like more American themed finishes if that's an option. I think that would be like in line with your mission, right?
Yeah. Give me an example. I mean, like we do a maple finish. Is that like, or is that like a little too like? How do you mean by American?
So for example, I was actually in Porto, in Portugal, just in January, and so when I looked at port, right away, like what came to me was I was expecting like a syrupy finish. I was expecting like more of that, sticky, the port sweet, like a dessert type of finish, right? And when I had it, it was really well balanced for the proof that it is. But what I picked out of it was strawberry granola, right? And kept coming back to me like strawberry, and then like clusters of granola or something, right?
Sure.
And so maybe it's just a branding thing, right? So maybe you continue to finish it, in port barrels, but the maybe branded like some of the beer companies do, right? Like strawberry finish, strawberry granola or something. I don't know if that goes with whiskey. Maybe you can get some marketing analysis to get there, but you see what I'm getting at is I expect European finished whiskeys really more from Scotch, I guess, because they're all European, right? But from an American whiskey, I've not tried one that's finished in French barrels or European wine barrels. So maybe instead of calling it a port, maybe it's the flavor profile that comes out, like that makes more sense to brand it as, right? And it was just maybe make it a fun twist.
Yeah. We've looked at well, I know we run up on time here. We looked at a kind of a parallel thought to that. It's like, like again, like cigar blend, like, okay, that's a kind of blunt example, but like, yeah, is there a nomenclature we can do? Now saying the flavor profile, if we say like the strawberry granola, like your example, the feds will stop us, because if we say the word strawberry and there's not strawberries in it, they'll flip a shit. But your point is very valid, and there's a lot there, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, maybe just call it maple syrup, because right, something that's more American.
Mark, nothing can get as American as American Single Malt finished in bourbon barrels.
Here. Yeah, honestly, that's truer words were never spoken.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's a second thing. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, and here's the second thing I noticed. Maybe this, is tangential, right? So on the Navy blend, I had very high expectations of that, because number one, I've not had a higher proof single malt American whiskey. I didn't even know anyone made that, right? So, I was really looking forward to that, but I just got a really, over and over again, I kept getting like a more ethanol mouthfeel on the back end. Great on the nose, but on the back end. But then I remembered, well, with bourbon cask strength things, maybe drop two drops of water, it changes the whole profile. Then when I had it, it was like more molasses, more oily, and I think that drowns out some of the, sting that comes from the back end ethanol. Like, I think just when you breathe it in, I don't know if there's maybe again, more of a branding thing, right? Like, hey, this is like the way you drink a cask strength bourbon. So an American single malt, add 2 drops of water, right? And then that completely, I think, changes experience and did it for me, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's heard. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Anyway, before we sign off, I'd like to know each one of yours pick of the day. Keith, beginning with you, what was your pick of the day?
I was in the beginning. I was definitely in love with the Bottle and Bond. I think it was the perfect balance between the Navy and the original one, and I think the Bottle and Bond had a little bit more depth and complexity to it. At the end of it all, the last 3 was amazing. And on top of that, I don't know if it's I haven't cleaned my palate enough or whatever the case is. I think I'm getting a little maple syrup out of the end now. Maybe it's, from the last one we finished was the Madura, but it's definitely pretty impressive. The last 3 finished.
Thank you.
Tony?
Honestly, I gotta say the Madura.
Okay, so 2 for Madura.
Yeah, exactly.
2 for Madura. Eric?
I'm actually, I mean, I really like the finished ones, but I think Bottle and Bond is the winner for me.
Bottle. How about you, Win?
Sorry, I love the sherry, hands down for me. I mean, that was I had to drink it several times just to, like, figure out what I was even drinking, and it was just so complex in so many levels. I just loved it.
Okay, Michael.
I also like the sherry, but I'm going to go for Bottle and Bond for a couple reasons. One reason is because it's the spirit that made the sherry so good. So yeah, and the fact that it's made fully made in Baltimore always has a place in my heart.
Okay, Corey?
I think I'm going to go with the Bottle and Bond. I mean, I guess this is what you call good problems when you're,
okay.
But
And
delicious.
Joe?
Yeah.
Joe.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, your pick of the day.
I would say the sherry for sure.
Okay, so Mark knows me. Sherry and port are, neck and neck, and then I like Navy strength a lot. I love Bottle and Bond, but Bottle and Bond reminds me a lot of, it gives me a lot of bourbon feel. So
Yeah.
Bottle and Bond is more bourbony, and if I really wanted a clean single malt feel, I'd lean more towards the Navy strength. So yeah, that's it, Mark. So you have the it's this time it's been pretty much split. 2 Bottle and Bonds, 2 sherries, and 2, and of course we are missing. I think who's gone from here. Okay, someone is missing. Yeah. Okay. So let's and Mark, which one is your favorite now?
My favorite is if I had to pick one to bring with me on a desert island, it would be the Navy strength.
Okay.
In any given moment, I might feel differently. Like right now, if I were to pour another one, I'd probably pour the Madeira just because it really hit well today. But yeah, the Navy strength is my mother's milk.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you for making it. Thank you, Mark, for hosting us. Thank you for wonderful whiskeys. And we hope to bring you back on sometimes in September, in fall. And we'll add more to the lineup then. In sometimes,
I can't wait.
Sometimes, I'll add some other whiskeys to the lineup. Okay.
And
so thank you, everybody.
I'll get you that Sauternes.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Hospitality.
Mark, thank you, kind, for inviting us.
Thanks, Cayenne.